Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Entheogenic Evolution Podcast. As always, I am your host, Martin, and I'm happy to have you with me today as I am joined by Susannah Rose Stokes from the House of Metamorphosis. Susannah is a former Marine who turned to plant medicine for healing and personal growth and has now taken on the mantle of helping to set up the House of Metamorphosis to help others on a similar journey and path. We had a great conversation almost a couple of months ago now. It's rather lengthy, and I'm really excited to bring it to you here on the podcast today. But first, a couple of quick announcements. As I'm away on vacation and recording and uploading this early, I do not have anybody to thank for supporting the podcast because, time, that thing. But if you have made a contribution in support of the podcast over the past week, thank you very much. It's very much appreciated. If you'd like to support this podcast, which is 100% listener supported, you can stop by my personal webpage at martinball.net, use the PayPal link at the top right of the page, or use the link over to my Patreon page of patreon.com/martinwball and sign up at the level that is most comfortable for you as a monthly supporter of this podcast. As I mentioned last week, I am making my album, or actually it's an EP. It's a 30-minute long EP of 4 songs, When Nature Calls. I'm making that available as an end of the year, just thank you gift to anybody who would like to receive it. It is currently available for free download over at my Bandcamp page, which is martinball.bandcamp.com. If you would like to receive this album, just enter 0 when prompted for a payment when downloading, and When Nature Calls is yours for free. And it's kind of a unique collection of songs with some field recordings of humpback whales that are recorded in Maui, and frogs and toads and insects in Florida, and a screech owl in my backyard. And all of the music is created around those field recordings. And though I am away right now, if you would like to set up a time to have a 30, 60, or 90-minute call after I get back home and get back in the office starting in January of 2023, you can just stop by my integration page of www.nondualentheogenicintegration.com. If you'd like to arrange a session with me, shoot me an email and we'll get that set up and get it on the calendar for 2023. And speaking of 2023, which is coming up very shortly, as I've mentioned before, the Entheogenic Evolution Podcast is turning 15 years old, so just want to wish happy birthday, sort of, to the podcast coming up here. It's been 15 great years, and who knows, maybe it'll be 15 more. And, at this point, I think I might be able to say that this is the longest consistently running podcast on the topic of psychedelics in the world. I don't know of any other podcasts that have been running consistently for 15 years. So maybe not. I don't know. But it's been a long run and a lot of great guests and lots more to come. Of course, still coming up on the podcast, we've got a couple more selections from the audiobook of the Entheological Paradigm 2021 edition. We're going to be wrapping that up very shortly and then moving on to another one of my audiobooks. Of course, all of my audiobooks, including my latest, Facilitating 5-MeO-DMT, an anthology of approaches to serving the God molecule, are all available at Audible, Amazon, and the iBookstore. And of course, my books are available in paperback and ebook at Amazon and other such outlets. So they're all out there, and you are welcome to them as you like. Okay, I think that's it for announcements for right now. Let's go ahead and get into our interview with Susannah Rose Stokes of House of Metamorphosis. As I mentioned, it is a bit of a long one, so sit back, relax, and enjoy. And at the conclusion, I'll have a little bit more music from my latest musical release, The Pure Energy of Unconditional Love. So we'll have another of those tracks at the end, so just stay tuned for a little music to take you out on your day. All right, enjoy. Well, I'd like to welcome on to the Entheogenic Evolution Podcast for this week's episode. We've got Susannah Rose Stokes, and she comes to me with a message from an advocate of hers who says that Susannah Rose Stokes is the co-founder of the House of Metamorphosis, which we're going to talk about. It's a legally registered church offering plant medicine, healing retreats, and transformative coaching programs. And Susannah, like one of my very recent guests, also was a member of the Marines. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about that and kind of what brought her out of being a Marine and then getting into plant medicines and ceremony. But Susannah, welcome to the show.
It's so wonderful to be here, Martin. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and we were just discussing we're both in different ash places. I'm in Ashland in Oregon, and you're in Asheville, North Carolina.
There's got to be something to that, like some kind of frequency similarity because of the ash word. I mean, ash, if you think about it, ashe means and so it is, right? So it's sort of this like certainty. It's like amen in other belief systems. So I kind of like that.
Yeah, I'm curious. Do you know where Asheville, where the name actually comes from? Because people ask that about Ashland all the time. Like, was there a big fire there? Was there a volcano? It's like, I have no idea. It's just Ashland. There's no ash around here. We do have volcanoes, which I don't think you have in North Carolina, but
We do not have volcanoes that I know of. I do know, I'm not answering your question yet, but I do know that these mountains here, the Blue Ridge Mountains, were once attached to Morocco, and they are the second oldest mountains in the world. So they're pretty ancient, and the land here is pretty potent, much like I think Ashland, but I have no idea where the name Asheville comes from. I'm going to have to look that up right after this.
yeah, well, fair enough. And
Yeah.
who knows? Somebody once
Yeah.
told me that we have the I-5 freeway that goes all the way from California through Oregon up to Washington, and someone once told me, oh yeah, there was a truck coming down the freeway into Ashland, and its brakes went out, and it's like, I think probably Ashland got its name before there were semi trucks. I'm just guessing. I think
Just
so.
guessing, just a thought. It's a little older than the semi tractor trailers and the I-5, probably. Yeah, I tend to think that there has to be someone's last name or something, but I'm gonna look this up and I'll get back to you on that one.
All right. So is this where you were raised, or is this your chosen home?
It's a great question. I was not raised in Asheville. I was raised outside of Georgia outside of Atlanta, Georgia, on a blueberry farm. And my whole family, my father's whole family, actually came over to North Carolina in the 1600s. So our family has like a county in North Carolina. It's like pretty established family in this state, but I had never lived here. And during the pandemic, which we'll talk maybe more about, I started to deepen into my spiritual work. And basically, my ancestors were like, you need to move to Asheville. That's where you need to go next. And that's where your work is needed. And so I told my partner, and he was like, what voices are you hearing? and and we decided to build a house here. But my family also does have a lake house here that I've been coming to since I was very young.
Okay, so you're a little familiar
Yeah,
with the area.
there is some familiarity for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm just curious if you ever run into someone from Ashland over there, because it could happen. Um,
Totally. I mean, I know several people. I don't know if they're in Ashland, Oregon, but I have like a huge group of friends who either live in Oregon all the time or part-time. So there's a connection between the two for
yeah.
sure. Uh-huh.
Great. Well, nobody else can see you right now except for me, but just looking at you, you're a young woman, but
Mm.
you seem to have had some interesting experiences thus far in your life. So let's start talking a little bit about your background now. So we know where you come from now, from outside
Mm.
of Atlanta, and you're living in Asheville. But according to your bio, you became a Marine. So I'm kind of curious what got you into the Marines.
Yeah, yeah. It does feel weird now. I look back and I'm like, oh, that was a strange life choice, but it was perfect at the time. So my father was a Marine,
Mm,
well before I was born, back in Vietnam era, and he just found it to be one of the most powerful experiences in his life. So he encouraged everyone around him, anyone he could possibly talk to join the Marine Corps. And being his daughter, I was a willing ear to that. And I felt very compelled to really just get the best and most intense leadership training I possibly could. My older brother was in the Marine Corps as well. And I decided when I was around 4, I was like 4 years old, watching my older brother graduate from boot camp. And I basically was like, I'll be a Marine too. And I stuck to that. So I went to the Naval Academy, and then I joined the Marine Corps, was a captain in the Marine Corps. I went to Afghanistan a couple of times. And before that, I had lived in other countries around the world. And it just was an interesting desire to serve. Like I had a really big heart for service. And to me, that felt like the place where I would serve.
Yeah. So how long were you in?
I was in for 5 years, and but I was in the Naval Academy for 4, which has its own, it's quite a military environment as well. And that, so totaling about 9 years. So I was basically in a military environment from the time I was 18 until 27, which was most of my, kind of prime years there.
Yeah. So it sounds like you feel that you really got something out of it. The leadership qualities that you developed and kind of the forge that it puts you through. But you're no longer a Marine. So what prompted the decision to end that career?
Yeah. I'll sort of start a little further back, which was when I was 17, I decided to go to China and do my senior year of high school there. And it was partly I just needed to leave this country. I was like, I have to go somewhere else. And I had begun learning Chinese and done some immersion in learning that language. And I experienced this like sense of freedom that I had never really encountered before that, because I was in a country by myself as a 17-year-old. And because my parents, for whatever crazy reason, were like, sure, you can go to China when you're 17 by yourself. That's fine. So that's another, odd thing about my journey. But when I then came back, I like hit the military pretty directly, because I went directly from high school graduation, and then a couple weeks later I hit the Naval Academy, and it was like a smack in the face. And although I thrived in the academic environment of the Naval Academy, it was quite quick that I realized that the military may not be the place I'd want to be forever. It did not fully suit my nervous system. And I think I struggled a lot with the concept of harming people.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking about joining the Marine Corps and being like, oh, I had these visions of being able to help people in like humanitarian settings. And that's kind of the idea that I had of what my service would look like. So when I look back on that, I'm like, Susannah, you joined like the premier fighting and killing force of the world in order to like save people's lives. That doesn't make any sense. And then when I got to Afghanistan, I remember I just went through like basically a dark night of the soul of like being very disconnected from the mission of what we were doing, but also feeling very inspired by some of the people that were around me. And like, it was a very challenging experience to hold both of like, I am participating in massive murder, and also like these people are not bad people that I'm surrounded by. No one's bad. Like none of the people who were in my unit or in the Marine Corps or the people that we were targeting. Right. So it was this concept of like what you talk a lot about, which is non-duality. And so that was very challenging. And I realized very quickly that it was not the place where I could stay for a long period of time. And I even had, while I was on my second deployment, a really beautiful leader who was a lieutenant colonel who took me aside, and he was like, you are amazing at so many things. Get out of this service. And in the Marine Corps, that's almost unheard of because they want to keep you in. They really want you to stay. And generally the leadership is always saying, stay, stay, stay. But he just was, very, very honest with me. And he was like, this is not where you're going to reach your potential. So that was an interesting experience for sure.
Yeah, it's so nice to have that reflection from somebody who's in authority and not just trying to rope you in for more. But it must have been a very difficult situation to kind of come to this realization that I don't like what I'm doing here, but I imagine you were probably in for a particular period of time. So it's not like you could just say, well, okay, I'm going to go home. I'm going to go do something else. So you're kind of trapped there for a while. That must have been very difficult.
I'm really glad you brought that up because this has been sort of something that I've been trying to impart on people that I actually became very clear that I wasn't going to stay in the Marine Corps past my 5-year contract. Mm-hmm. Within about a month of being commissioned into the Marine Corps. And it had been my dream since I was very young. So I was like this ideal dream. And then I reached it and I met some of the people who were in charge of me and they were not great, let's say. And I immediately became disillusioned and was like, I cannot stay here any longer than I have to. But it was like basically at the very beginning of being in the Marine Corps that I was like, oh yeah, this is not my place. And I knew that I had 5 years there. And so I could have felt very trapped, but I chose not to. I chose as much as I could to, first of all, just know that like there was a part of me that had chosen this and there was a reason for that choice. Mm-hmm. And also for to be able to like, it's not that I gave up. It's that I then had more freedom because I wasn't chasing after any kind of like rank. And in the military, it gets very political, right? So I wasn't chasing rank. I wasn't chasing any kind of certification. I really didn't care very much about what people thought about me or what I did because I wasn't trying to grow my career there. And that actually was a huge bit of freedom for me because I got to just not do whatever I wanted. It's the Marine Corps. You can't do whatever you want. But I got to just like ask for the jobs that I wanted because they were often the jobs that nobody else wanted because they were dead ends. And I loved those.
Yeah, so it's kind of ironically liberating to be sort of accepting the situation that you're in, but not looking at it as what are the necessary stepping stones I need to reach in order to get the next goal and the next goal, so that then you can really find your own way within that. So, well, that's great. In deciding to leave the Marines, did you discuss this over with Dad, and what did he say?
Yeah. Well, it made it a little easier because I actually ended up getting sort of in trouble at the end of my time. And to the civilian world, it doesn't make a lot of sense because the rules of the Marine Corps are so particular and so strict. But there was basically a thing that happened while I was deployed, and it put me on this like black book of officers. And that sort of solidified my fate that I couldn't really stay in after that because I wouldn't have gone up in the ranks. And it was the sort of administrative thing. I even had some really beautiful leaders, some colonels and all these people fighting for me to be able to not be on this list. And I eventually got exonerated of all the things. But that alone was like it sort of solidified that I was getting out. And I told my father, I was like, well, I really can't stay in regardless. So even if I wanted to, I can't. So here's my choice was made for me. And that made that conversation a lot easier.
No, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So it's definitely not at all unusual in this day and age at this point for people who have been involved in the military to then become interested in plant medicines. Something that's being used for a lot of veterans, a lot of people in the military looking to treat PTSD and other issues related to, seeing combat and sort of the horrors of war. So where did your interest first open up around the plant medicines?
Yeah. Yeah. I believe I really started them because I wanted to learn how to play, which was something that I had not ever experienced. And I have to hand it to my partner, who I met in Afghanistan, also in the Marine Corps. His name is Andre. And we met each other while we were married, and we ended up divorcing both of our spouses, and now we're together 8 years later. So that's another story in and of itself. But he introduced me to the concept of playing and like recreational fun, which wasn't really in my lexicon or even my concept of reality. I had been sort of trained and built to like work and focus, and perhaps addicted to it as well. A lot of like addictions to productivity. And when we got out of the Marine Corps, we both ended up in the Bay Area, and there's a big, Burning Man community there. And so I get kind of encouraged to go to some of the little festivals, and at these events, of course, psychedelic use is pretty common. And so I felt really safe with these people, and it was a really beautiful opportunity. And so I engaged with LSD first. And I remember watching the trees breathe, and I was like, oh, okay. And it took me back actually to the time when I grew up on the farm, because I spent a lot of time by myself in the first 5 years of my life on the farm, just surrounded by nature. And I was just in nature all the time. And I remember watching the trees breathe when I was very young, but I had forgotten that I could see that I could experience that. So I was immediately like awakened back into my healthy inner child, and also was able to play again, which was really amazing. And quite quickly it began, although there was some healing and of course like some trauma that I had to process, a lot around vicarious sexual assault, where I was a victim advocate in the Marine Corps. So I spent a lot of time like counseling people who had been assaulted, and surrounded by people in my personal life who had been assaulted in various ways, in sexual ways. And so I had taken on a lot of their trauma into my own body. And so I got to kind of process that. But what I learned quite quickly with plant medicines was like, I looked around at everybody else and I was like, guys, my little work brain goes into mode, and it's like, there's so much more here. Like, this is not just like a recreational thing. There's like massive potential in this to be healing. So that's where I began. And that's kind of where then my focused nature took it more to a therapeutic space.
Yeah, which, is great. There's lots of emphasis these days on, use of psychedelics for treating trauma, treating addiction, treating depression, end of life issues. And I think all of those they're fantastic applications. And certainly when we just speak of healing in general, that's a really big topic, and lots of people can use it, especially in the world that we currently live in.
Yes.
It's not exactly a stress-free, conducive to life zone that we're living in currently. But I also like that your entry into it came through this idea of rediscovering a sense of play, which I think sometimes that can be maybe overlooked or even debased within the psychedelic community, that there's a sense of, well, we've got to be serious about it. And we've got to treat serious illnesses, and we've got to have a serious political stance on this. And it overlooks the fact that, well, actually also psychedelics are a lot of fun, and it's okay to take them for fun. And just what you're describing, sort of that re-entry into childhood wonder, is in and of itself is such a beautiful gift. And then, you know, for you to kind of build off of that and look at, okay, well, what are the further potentials? That's all completely legitimate. But it's also, if there weren't that sense of play there, I mean, you could just see, well, it might just become another work addiction in its own way. And so I hope that you've retained that sense of play and that sense of fun as well.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And I feel like I'm now due for like a mountain hike with mushrooms, but I feel like actually our sense of play is therapeutic. It was at the time I sort of saw them as opposing forces, right? I saw the polarity of like work versus play, but I now understand, being, you know, a little more in the non-dual mindset like you are, that these are all interrelated and all interconnected. And the more that we can fully embody play, the more that we can also align our work with what we enjoy, and we can deeply enjoy life and feel permission to feel pleasure and to feel joy coming through us no matter what we're doing. So I found the reconnection with play and my inner child to be probably one of the most healing aspects of these medicines.
Yeah. And I think it's just an important message to kind of repeat and put out there, that sense of play is important, that play is, you know, if we want to use the term sacred, it's just as sacred as anything else. And as a human being, we are nourished so much by play. And, you know, like you mentioned Burning Man, and I'm just thinking about, it's been a long time since I've been to Burning Man, but I have never worked so hard, yet also had so much fun, right? Yeah. That you have to work really hard to have fun at Burning Man. But it's worth it. So yeah, if we can combine these elements, and sometimes in some psychedelic circles, there's just, for me, there's an over sense of seriousness about it that turns me off a little bit. Like if people are super sincere in being serious, then it's like, well, where's the fun? You know? And sometimes there's even kind of adopting sort of this value of suffering in order to grow and suffering in order to learn. And even you used the term earlier of the dark night of the soul. And sometimes people applaud you when like, oh, you're really suffering. You're having a terrible time. Oh, great. It's a dark night of the soul. You're really going to grow now. It's like, man, I'd much rather grow through play than suffering and torment.
I really appreciate this. And I appreciate you calling it in, because one of the things about the medicine I work with these days is a message that keeps coming through so potently is healing doesn't have to be hard.
Yeah.
And it's like, healing doesn't have to be hard. And the first time I heard that through my work, I was like, what?
What do you mean?
I was like, what do you mean?
Of course it's hard.
Of course it's hard. We have to suffer, and life is suffering. And this is like, you know, you have to like earn your stripes. And of course, this is actually a belief system that I deeply held from the military, because you have to like suffer and work your way up in order to be respected and things like that. And I do believe in effort. I deeply believe in effort, but effort doesn't have to be hard. It can be abundantly joyful, kind of like at Burning Man, where you're working harder, you're moving your body. If I'm in like a deep flow in dance, my body is tired after, right? Like I'm pooped.
Yeah.
But the effort can be abundantly joyful, and it doesn't have to be hard at all.
Yeah. And, you know, I was just thinking that we could take two groups of kids, and we could make one group of kids really suffer and make them learn stuff, and we can punish them for not getting it correct. And then we could take another group of kids and we could make it as fun as possible. And I bet you anything, it's the group that's having fun. They're the ones who's actually going to learn and grow the most.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of analogy for our whole society.
Yeah.
As you know, of like how we have gotten to this like seriousness and we take ourselves so seriously. This is also part of the like attachment to the ego of like, I've worked so hard to build up this
Yeah.
person. And I think when I went through my like death and rebirth, which was facilitated by 5-MeO DMT, I I watched my ego die, and I also watched all of the things that I had built over like 30 some odd years of life, and all these things that I'd worked for just like shed away and be like, well, you're not a Marine anymore. You're not working in the corporate world. It doesn't matter who you know. Now you're going to start this whole new career as like as a spiritual guide, as a priestess, and work with medicine, and none of the certifications or anything that you've done before this matters. And I was like, mother. But it gave me this sense of joy of like, I can be whatever I want to decide that I'll be, or whatever feels authentic to me. And I don't have to take it so seriously because it's just one of the shapes that my being has decided to incarnate in.
Yeah. Well, what a beautiful place to arrive at of, in a sense, kind of total freedom of really deeply realizing it's up to you. Not what you've been, not what you've been planning for, not what anybody's expecting of you, but it's up to you. So let's back up a little bit and let's talk a little bit more about the trajectory that got you to that point. And then we can follow up with what came after that. But yeah, so you discovered LSD through connecting through play. You started to contemplate some of the more therapeutic or some of the more quote unquote serious aspects of it. But then how did things develop from that point?
Yeah. Yes. And then I began to deeply consider like, okay, what are some of these medicines that I'm interested in? And being a former Marine, I naturally wanted to climb Everest first, right? That's of course.
Give me the toughest one. Come on.
Exactly. Like, hit me in the face, coach. So I worked with 5-MeO DMT, which actually I have to say, I don't think I would have sought out 5-MeO DMT if it hadn't come into my awareness through a dear friend, basically through the same person that had introduced me to LSD. One of our dear friends was like, oh, I have a facilitator for 5-MeO DMT, and I just did a session with him. It was powerful, and it arrived in my life pretty distinctly. And so I can't necessarily say that I even like sought it out or chose it. And that experience was definitely like a kick in the face for me. It was rough. It was not the like expansive opening, like gentle, fun play that LSD was. And I'm trying to think if there was anything in between there. Not really, nothing, no other medicines in between those. And 5-MeO DMT, I watched my body die and had a whole sort of narrative around what was happening to my body. So it was like a story of my body dying on the floor of my condo where I had started this journey, being taken away in the ambulance. I watched my body be taken away. I watched my parents like mourn my death. I just experienced my whole dying process and judgment around how could you have allowed yourself to do this and die at this age. What were you thinking? That kind of thing. And my inner critic got really loud. And the one phrase that came out of it was, what would your parents think? And I was like, and when I woke up, obviously not physically dead. I burst into tears and had a really beautiful cathartic cry. And that phrase kept ringing in my head. And I was like, wow, Susannah, this is how much you care about what your parents think and what others think, basically. And it really shone a light on what I was trying to prove to the world of like, and my parents essentially, my father specifically, of how much are you trying to prove yourself to this one person who isn't you? So that led me a couple weeks later, and this was not really planned. Once again, I was experiencing play. I went on a weekend with friends, and we were in a vineyard. And this was a couple weeks after 5-MeO DMT, which I'm now realizing the intelligence of that is that my body was wide open because of the 5-MeO DMT. And I did a full dose of LSD. And I ended up walking up to the top of this little small mountaintop in California and sitting down to meditate. And in that moment, I had like what I can only describe as a full spiritual awakening, which felt like a massive vortex of energy that sucked me into it, almost like a tornado of energy. And it told me I basically experienced the fullness of my perfection of who I am and why I am in the body that I am in. And it described to me all of my family lineage and like why I'm related to those particular people. And it was also pretty clear that like the path I was on in the corporate world was not really aligned with my purpose. And so it was like, yeah, so like you're a healer, you should do that. And then it kind of left me with it. And I was like, huh. And then I spent a whole year in disillusionment of pretty much like almost like not like a zombie, but like walking around not feeling fully in my body and not feeling fully connected and feeling a bit like discombobulated and disconnected and disassociated. And I remember feeling extra triggered by the work that I was doing. Like it became, even though it was once work that I'd wanted to do, I was working at Facebook. I was like really building some projects and products that I was so interested in once upon a time. And then I just completely lost interest in those things. And then I worked with mushrooms, and I worked in a sacred ceremonial container about 1 year later. And that activated me. And I actually chose those. I sought those out. I think in between there, I also worked with San Pedro, but I chose mushrooms, or they chose me, they called me. And I worked in that sacred ceremonial space, and that they were like, this is what you do. Welcome. And it really solidified who I am and why I'm here.
Well, thank you for sharing all of those details. There's a few things there I would just like to sort of comment and reflect on, because I think it's educational for listeners to kind of understand a little bit of the trajectory here, because there are certain elements that, in a sense, are kind of archetypal or very common. So first you have the rediscovery of a sense of play and kind of regaining a sense of yourself that was lost. And what I find really interesting about the story that you just told is that you're working with different medicines, but usually there's some kind of through line, and we can see certain patterns that can show up. And so one of the patterns that I've seen with a lot of people, whether they're just starting out with 5-MeO or whatever it may be, if their first experience tends to be very blissful and open and happy, it's a bit ironic, but usually then somewhere in the category of next experience, might not be the immediate next one, but for you it was with 5-MeO, where once you've had a more positive experience, what tends to come up next is where there is difficulty, where you're holding on, where there's aspects of your narrative that you've used to shape yourself that ultimately are not really serving you. And so then that's what you encountered on your 5-MeO experience, but that doesn't in any way make it So this is a place sometimes where people say, oh, well, I must have failed because I just, had this whole negative story that was going on in my head. And it's like, no, it's not a failure at all. It's because they think, well, it should be like, oh, it's so blissful and amazing. But there's this trajectory of, okay, you've already had a good time. So now you have to encounter, like, honestly face, like, this is the narrative that you're holding on to, that you're constructing your identity around, and look at all the drama it's creating for yourself, and that inner critic and that inner judge. And then by facing that, then you were able to release a lot of the pain around that through that crying. Yeah. So that makes it a very productive experience. It doesn't necessarily make it like, well, it wasn't the bliss bomb I've been told it was, but it actually was very productive. And then after that, now in a sense that you've processed through that, then in that LSD experience on the mountaintop and meditating, now you're open for something new to come in. Right? Because you've rediscovered joy, you've processed out the old narrative, now something new can come in. And then it created that discombobulation and that sort of that disjuncture in your life where you're not satisfied with what you're doing now, but not yet fully stepping into sort of this inspiration for what you are to do. So that's where you start to experience the discontinuity between your true energy and what you're engaging in within life. And that it's like you're out of alignment. And that's a phase that some people just get stuck in, or it becomes very difficult. It's very hard to be in that state where you realize, fuck, I don't want to work at Facebook anymore, but I'm going to step into being a priestess. Like, what the hell does that even mean? Like, I don't even know, so that's another common phase that people go through. And it's because sometimes people think, oh, well, if you receive the inspiration on the mountaintop, you're going to walk down off the mountaintop and know immediately this is how to do it.
Yeah. It's like, okay, sure.
Yeah. So then more consciously seeking out mushrooms and using that as sort of a training ground, a new training ground for yourself. So there's really some beautiful elements of that story, and shows that it's not always easy. You don't always have the answers, and it can be uncomfortable in various different ways as you go through it. But you're actually gaining all along the way.
100%. And I couldn't agree more. And I think it definitely took me some time to be comfortable with the experience that I had with 5-MeO. I didn't think it was like wrong. I just felt that I didn't achieve like that place that people had talked about. And what it was for me was it was a purging agent. I mean, it was just like, it was just clearing me out and clearing my channel out kind of all in one go. And that moment of discombobulation was like, that is where I now really love to work with people because I was in it for a good amount of time and it did feel so uncomfortable. And I felt like I didn't have a lot of guidance or a lot of like, almost like I'm blind, right? And I'm kind of like feeling it out of like, okay, what feels like the right path, but I don't know because all of my senses and all of my power has not fully awakened yet. I have like a little piece, or I have like the smell of what I'm looking for, but I don't have anything else. And that's it. And I just have to follow that. So it was pretty interesting.
Yeah. And having gone through it yourself, that's really what makes you available to assist and help guide other people.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like I'm the perfect like fractal of what our collective or others are going through. Like my process has mirrored so many other people's process. It really is quite archetypal in so many ways. So I'm like, I get you. Like when you're in that place, I understand because I've been exactly in that place. And now that I've developed some tools of how to really navigate those things more mindfully, I can help awaken the other senses in you so that you don't have to be blind for as long in that journey. So that's been really helpful.
So in going through this process, and this is a term that gets used a lot, and I think it can be very vague, but basically you're going through a kind of spiritual process, right? So there's the term spiritual. And, we're going to get to the fact that you've got this house of metamorphosis, right? Which works perfectly with what we're talking about here, as an entheogenic church. But how did you feel about your own, again, quote unquote, spiritual process? Did it jive with how you were raised, or was this something new for you? That this is always an interesting question as people either leave one religion or one spirituality and go into another, or perhaps cultivate something that wasn't there before. So I'm curious how you would describe that for yourself.
In terms of like how it was received by family, community, that kind of thing?
Yeah, and also you yourself. So all of that. And,
all of it.
And again, especially since you had that thought, like, whoa, what would your parents think? And what would dad think? So we could talk about that. What does dad think? What do you think? And if you were to describe how it changed you, how would you describe that?
I would begin with how it changed me, because then that can kind of inform how we speak about how I related to my community.
Yeah.
The connection with myself, capital S, I often say, was so much stronger and so much deeper. And for lack of a better way of describing it, I gave less fucks what other people thought, because I had such a strong message from within myself that it was almost drowning out the other voices. And and that has that in and of itself has been a struggle of mine, of like, how much do I listen to other people and be, rather than being focused fully on my own process and my own journey. But this gave me a new depth of confidence in being able to say no, or to say, this is my journey and it's not yours. Because I could feel the like sovereignty of who I was versus what other souls or what other journeys or what other people had for their own journeys. And I think my father specifically was put in my life to help me with that, because he is so persuasive and so his energy is so big that in order to individuate and be my own person, I've had to like really get big in my own sovereignty. I think that the process of sort of re-engaging with my community, first of all, did mean that some people needed to be let go of. But there was some people who were just not going to understand this process and this journey. And that process of letting go and shedding can be hard. And it was definitely hard for me with some people. But with my inner voice louder, that it helped a lot, because the inner voice was like, it's fine. Like, just keep going. Let them fall, to the wayside for now. And maybe you'll be able to rekindle a relationship later when you're in different places. And then with my family, the way that it has actually worked out really beautifully. First of all, my parents are academics. They're both lawyers. And so if you can provide them enough evidence of anything, they will believe it. And I hope they listen to this podcast. But they will really like consider all of the concepts. They hold a more non-dual approach to life in general. And so and this is something I learned about them, I think, through this process, because I had an idea of of what they wanted me to do. And what I realized was that they just wanted me to be successful. And I had a story around what I thought
Right.
they thought success was. And truly, they were like, look, we just want you to be happy and fulfilled and in your purpose. And whatever that is, we will open ourselves to it, even if it doesn't look like what we expected. And then on top of that, the last piece I'll share is that my grandfather, my father's father, and his whole lineage were all pastors, bishops, priests, ministers, like every single one of them for like generations. And this work is deeply spiritual, and it is very grounded and rooted in love, and like the type of love that Christ taught and the type of love that Buddha taught and all of these great masters. And so coming into this actually brought me, I think, more into alignment with my family, because I am following in the footsteps in some way of many of my predecessors. So coming at it from that perspective helped my family understand better. And the evidence also helped, which is why I do a lot of research on psychedelics.
Yeah, well, it's so nice when you can have parents who can be rational about it. And even there, actually, that was something that I wanted to mention about your 5-MeO experience, that, you know, when people are confronted with that experience of death, whether ego death, whether you're identifying it as like a physical death or a transcendent death or whatever it may be, that it often is close family relationships that show up for people, because those are the things that tie us most to whatever our identity is. And sometimes when people get into these areas, you know, it conflicts with their parents' religion or spirituality or sense of what's right or wrong or whatever it may be. And so it creates a divide. And just as you said, that sometimes with friends, you've got to let them go. Sometimes that's also true for family members. But it's very nice when it, you know, even if mom and dad don't necessarily want to do this themselves, which I could ask if they are interested, but at least they're interested in the data and in the facts. And, you know, my own parents have been that way, that they are not interested in any kind of mind altering substances, but, you know, they are very interested in, well, what's the scientific research, what's happening in the medical community. Like, that's something they can get behind. And, you know, when I start talking about non-duality, like, I don't know about any of that, you know?
Yeah, it's a little too much there, Martin. Back it up.
Yeah.
But yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but in cultivating, as you say, your own sovereignty, I think that is also just such an important point, because really I do see the entheogenic work should be self-empowering. Mm-hmm. And this is where I think spirituality can get a little confusing, because sometimes when people think of spirituality, think, oh, well, being spiritual is attending to everybody else's needs and making sure everybody else is comfortable and everybody else is happy and kind of giving away of yourself so that you're serving others, versus the model that I like to use is, no, actually, you're empowering yourself to really fully be yourself. Not everybody's going to like that. Not everyone's going to accept it. Not everyone's going to understand it. But then at least you know where you really can apply yourself. And you're honest about it. And that's what then can empower others to fully be themselves. And it's not about going around and trying to hold everybody's hand and make everybody feel good.
Snaps for Martin. Yeah. I love that. And I really resonate with that. And I mentioned something earlier that I'll kind of come back to here, which was I struggled a lot with sovereignty and confidence versus selfishness and narcissism.
Yeah.
And I have been called a narcissist by several people in my very close, like, relationships, mostly exes and my sister and some other people in my life. And a lot of it is associated with me putting my needs first, which I still have a, like, okay, how much do I put my needs for? Like, at what point do I become selfish? But I think about this a lot, because and even my clients and a lot of people that I know, are still under the sort of Protestant way of thinking, or like the puritanical way of thinking, which is like this all needs to be about everyone else. And if anything is about you at all, you are selfish. And the word selfish is um, so triggering to us because we've been steeped in this culture of everything needs to be about everyone else. And now everyone's walking around not having filled up their own cup because they've been taught to try to fill up everybody else's cup first. And I feel like it's an act of rebellion that I choose to care for myself and care for my own being and go on these journeys, which then has ultimately ended up in me having a ton of energy to be able to show up for and help other people. So I am still ongoing on like where the line is, but I'm trying to really undo that puritanical way of looking at like serving ourselves and being self-full versus selfish. And I think it's deeply important because as we step into this next consciousness, a lot of this next consciousness is about sovereignty. It's about agency. It's about not necessarily individuating always and all the time, but it's about understanding the difference between my individual self, my sovereign self, and the unified self. And how do I play in both of those realms really, really balanced?
Yeah, well, thank you for mentioning all of that because I think it's a very important issue, and it's something that I think that we could have more kind of cultural discussions around. What is the difference between selfish narcissism versus self-empowerment and self-love, right? And where are the lines of responsibility, and what does it mean to be an empowered person and to really care for yourself, to care for your own process. And then also, as you go through this, you develop your own confidence and you develop your own sense of authority. And then other people take that as, oh, you're being egotistical or like you're intolerant or you're not accepting of other people's views, but it doesn't come from a narcissistic place. It comes from a sense of self-knowing that I think that there's a deep, deep difference there between, because the narcissist is attached to what he or she or they or whatever pronoun we want to use usually wants to be true and wants other people to think is true, versus a place of self-empowerment comes from a place of knowledge. Of self-knowledge. And, from that place, there is confidence, there is authority, and there is a sense of purpose that comes from that. And I just don't know if it's really discussed enough. I don't know if that distinction is really appreciated enough. Because, as you say, I've certainly received a lot of that over the years. Same kind of thing, like, oh, Martin, he's an egomaniac narcissist. And it's like, no, I'm just really confident about what I'm sharing, and I'm not going to back down just because it makes other people uncomfortable or because I don't fit their model of what they think I should be. I am not interested in being anything for anyone except myself.
Yeah. A weird person to quote, but Ayn Rand said something like that in her book Atlas Shrugged, which is a controversial book, and I love that about it because it has so many different meanings. But she talks about never living for another man, for another person, that we live for our own selves and for our own being. And I think when I consider like the concepts of reincarnation, which I believe in, that how could we live for anyone else if we're on this soul journey and it's only our journey? Like, it's completely unique to us. And yes, we're interacting with and we're connecting with these other souls and spirits along the way, but I naturally have to care for myself because I'm the only spirit in this universe that could possibly understand all of the intricacies of who I am. And I hear a lot from people who are maybe struggling or having like dark feelings of like, you don't understand me. You'll never understand me. You'll never get me. And I'm like, that's right. I will not.
Yeah. And
I never
why is it my job to get
right.
you? Isn't that your job?
Right. I'm like, you're exactly correct. I will never fully understand what you have experienced or what you are experiencing, but I can be here, along the journey to at least offer you a mirror on that journey. So it's a really interesting discussion, and I remember in one of the last podcasts you did with the other Marine,
Yeah.
that there is a lot of spiritual narcissism in the world, and I think that that's also incredibly important to speak about and to be aware of, because I have seen it, I am in it, like, and because I have been called words like this in my past lives, I'm so sensitive to where is that line of how do we grow from a place of empowerment and be empowered and speak truth while also deeply respecting the sovereignty of other beings, and it not being like I'm, shoving anything down your throat. I'm just here and I'm speaking my voice, and you might get uncomfortable with it, and that's okay.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I like to say, like, oh, if you don't like what I have to say, don't read my books, don't listen to my podcast. It's really easy. I'm not coming knocking on anybody's door like, hey, I've got a message for you.
You're not going to take the Jehovah's Witness route. I think that's probably a smart choice.
Yeah, but it's interesting that, you worked at Facebook, because this is, the new town square where people do try to use social pressure to convince people to be certain ways and to present themselves. And it's such a messy place where all of that, takes place in certain ways.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. So good for you for being out of it.
Yes. And it is like fascinating that our culture has now, grown into this already. It feels like something that really we weren't fully ready for. We weren't fully prepared for. And so it's an interesting journey. And that is one of the many reasons, after working at organizations like that and watching the hatred and the hate speech and the just like the nastiness of society kind of bubble up because now people have a voice. That is one of the big reasons that I was inspired to do the work I do with House of Metamorphosis and with the retreats we run and things, because I could see on a collective level the suffering that was happening and how that suffering was then turned into hatred of one another, of division, right? Yeah. And othering. And I grew up in a household where like the concept, my parents work in anti-discrimination and they do a lot of like equality work. And my grandfather was worked a lot in integration when he was a bishop in Mississippi back in the 50s and 60s. And so there's a lot of that energy. And so the concept of discrimination against people I was very sensitive to that. I still am very sensitive to that. And so it's one of the big things that's inspired me to use and to work with these medicines to help people awaken the love and the sovereignty within themselves so that we can then just love each other a little more. Yeah.
Maybe project a little bit less.
Yeah. Like throw your crap on people a little less and own it and like work through it. And we've also built up in my belief system. I feel that we really haven't done a lot of like emotional or spiritual cleansing work as a society for probably a couple thousand years, or at least 1,000 years. Because we haven't been in tribal societies where we haven't had shaman that were actively like cleaning out the gunk, the energetic residue that we've been building up. So it's been building up, building up, building up. And I sometimes call it like our big storage units. And we have giant storage units full of family trauma. And then we're just projecting that storage unit worth of trauma onto everybody else because we don't have real tools of how to release it and cleanse it. So that's what we want to kind of do, is just clean it all out. I'm just really a janitor. That's what I do.
Yeah. Oh, I can totally appreciate that. Just gotta let my dog out just so you can go bark at some squirrels or birds or something. But when I come back, let's talk about House of Metamorphosis.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so this all sounds like it leads in very nicely to House of Metamorphosis. So let's just start with, it's a big leap, or maybe not leap, but it's a big step. It's a big pivot to go from kind of self-work, self-exploration, self-growth, then to wanting to not only serve and facilitate and work with others, but also to actually create an institution in order to do that in. And, just going back to the email that was sent in reference to you, that House of Metamorphosis is a 508c1a pending organization. I mean, so you're taking all the steps, the official steps. Some people, what they want to do is they want to have, private underground retreats, or then maybe go to Mexico and do some retreats, but actually doing something that is then registered in the United States and has some kind of tax status and legal status. That's a really big step. And that's something that gets discussed a lot here on the podcast, from lawyers to people running these things. But what, other than the inspiration that we've already talked about here, what is it that led you to like, okay, this is what I want to do, and then please tell us all about it?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, one of the initial like triggers was right after I left Facebook. I actually went to go be a chief of staff at a startup, and I was working for the CEO there. And it turned out to be one of the most toxic cultures I've ever been a part of. And what was fascinating to me was like the team was great, the product was incredible, the office was awesome, like everything was great, and the CEO was just like tearing it apart from the inside out. And it was a lot of his own trauma, right, that he was projecting onto so many other beings. And it was in that period of time where I was ideating, like where I was in that sort of discombobulated state of like, okay, what do I do next? And it became very clear that leaders in particular, like people who have any kind of influence, and when I say leaders, I mean anybody who has the courage to lead themselves first. It could be a mother, right? She's leading children, but people who have influence over other people and take responsibility for it, if they don't take responsibility for it, or if they don't clear out at least some of it, then they're just going to keep shitting on everyone else, and it's going to tear full organizations apart, and it's going to affect real people's lives. And I tend to think on a 1,000 to 10,000 year scale. That's just like where my mind and concept goes. So I'm highly strategic in the way that I operate, which has its downsides too, because it can make me seem cold at times. I got to like remind myself to get down to the like human level. But when I was ideating all of this and visioning this, I was like, well, first I need to get trained to be a coach so I can coach this CEO, so that I can help him and help him be better for this organization. And so I got trained. And so I became a certified coach, and I actually, the company paid for it, which was great because I was like, I can serve you. I can help you in this way. And of course, he didn't want to be helped in that way.
Yeah.
Even with my additional, coaching or training. And so what I realized is that actually that was for my own process. And so I became that coach. Then I was called to become a Reiki master. I studied that for a little while. And then I began working on my master's thesis. And during this time, I was activated into medicine and mushrooms and sacred work with mushrooms, with a guide who mentored me, and I worked with several other guides from different lineages that all trained me in different ways. And as I began to build all of this, I realized that we really need to be able to offer this legally or in some capacity, in some container where people feel deeply safe. Because first of all, I could feel the wave of psychedelics like coming. I could feel that in the business space.
Mm-hmm.
And I really didn't want there to be the only option to be medical, because there's so many things challenged with the medical facilitation of anything, of like healthcare. And so by no means do I say that that's the wrong way. I simply offer that I wanted there to be other options for people. And to me, it was deeply important to maintain an element of spirituality. And being the daughter of attorneys who grew up basically in a law firm, I started, doing paralegal work when I was around 6 years old. I feel like I should have an honorary law degree from all the work I've done over the years. But I was like, okay, we have to be able to figure out how to do this more legally. And so gathering the team of people, it honestly, when I began to ideate, it just came together. Like I can't even describe it, how it happened. Everything else in my life has been hard. This has not been hard. This has been momentum and inertia, and it feels like the universe is quite literally supporting me and us and is like on our side, because it's brought me all of the resources and all of the people and all of the things that I have needed exactly when I was ready to have those things. So I will say that going inward for a pretty big period of time during 2020 was very potent for me in that process, because I was able to kind of pull away from the world and listen to my voice and the channel that comes through me even louder and even more pronounced without having a lot of outside voices.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been incredibly powerful in this process, because there's a lot of reasons and a lot of voices that would be like, this is a terrible idea. Don't ever do this. But it's become a really beautiful thing. And now we've hosted many retreats over a couple of years. I've worked with probably hundreds of people at this point in retreat spaces and one-on-one work. And then what I realized was, when I stepped into my soul work, I got greater access to all of the things that had been waiting to come through me. That there were all of these like talents and skills and things that I just knew how to do intuitively through my body, that I just had never used them before. So I think that it was kind of like opening a pipe, and like suddenly everything just was allowed to come through. And a house of Metamorphosis was born.
Yeah. So with the House of Metamorphosis, is it actually a house, or we should say a physical location? Is this a place in Asheville that people can go to? Or is it more of an umbrella concept in the sense that kind of developing the legal protections that then if you have a retreat at a retreat center that's not specifically owned by you or something, that the protection transfers to that place. So tell us a little bit about how this works. And I think that we're definitely in sort of the cutting edge of this, that there have been a few long-standing and theogenic churches and religions that have, they've gone all the way to the Supreme Court, or they've gone all the way to the federal court, such as, one of the examples is here in Ashland, we have the Santo Daime Church, which took the federal government to court in 2009, and they had their right to drink ayahuasca legally recognized as a religious sacrament, and that's under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And then we've got other places that have applied for religious exemptions, such as Soul Quest in Florida, and they ultimately got denied, and that was through the DEA. And even that is bizarre, like why the Drug Enforcement Agency has authority over a quote-unquote religious body when they have no idea what religion is. I mean, I was a religious studies professor, and that was the first thing I would ask my students is, what is religion? And I'll tell you, just coming out of the Western school system, students would always propose a definition of religion, and then I would be able to immediately tell them, okay, this is showing Western cultural bias.
100%.
And so these are students who are just starting to take a religion course. Nobody in the DEA has ever taken a religion course. They don't know what the hell religion is. Judges don't necessarily know what religion is. No. And so then we've got other places that are standing up as churches or temples. They have not yet gone to court. So we don't know what the status is going to be. There also are a number of lawyers now working in this area, some of whom I've had on the podcast. So this is a burgeoning cultural area that it's kind of running tandem to the legal psychedelic therapy, which is more the medical model again. So this is the spiritual model. And I think that they're both needed, and I think we need to go beyond both of those. But coming back to you in House of Metamorphosis, tell us a little bit more about how it works, and also that your I lost the numbers of 508. Whatever.
Yeah, it's a 508c1a. Yes, exactly.
Yes. So what is that? What is that? And it's pending. Yeah. So just inform us a little bit more, because again, this is very cutting edge. That this is a new development that's happening kind of around the world, but that there are certain pioneers like yourself who are trying to go through all the steps to really do it above board. So share with us, please.
Absolutely. Well, this is the perfect time to say, so 508c1a is what churches are, essentially. So like the Mormon Church, the Methodist Church, the Catholic Church, they are 508c1as under federal law in the United States, is what it's technically a faith-based organization is what that is. And they are nonprofit, although they're not in the register of nonprofits like a 501c3 would be, for example. I also started a 501c3, so I have like an understanding of the slight differences between the two. And obviously 501c3s can be completely non-spiritual at all. Like they can be fully just nonprofits. And to share with you, because when we first connected, it was pending, and now we are officially a 508c1a, and the name is slightly different, and that was what was holding us up. So we are technically the House of Embodied Metamorphosis now, because House of Metamorphosis was a little too vague, I guess, for the government. So I found that interesting that we had to shift the name slightly to make it a little more specific. But what that allows us to do is, just like you said, under the Freedom of Religion Restoration Act, we basically, using the precedent set by the Santo Daime Church in their Supreme Court case, we can say that because we have a system of beliefs, a statement of beliefs, we have a whole structure, and all beings who engage with our medicine in the United States are members of our church and are members of our community. People are able to engage with these, what we call sacraments, as part of their spiritual process. And what's pretty magical and beautiful about the United States, although there are plenty of things that are a mess, is that we do have freedom of religion, unlike China, for example, where I lived for some time. And you can join whatever churches you want to, and you can be a member of those communities. And then we have freedom to serve you, sacrament, within the guidelines that we set. So that process is pretty detailed, I would say. The process of outlining what the statement of belief says, and what is massively distinct between like the healthcare route and the spiritual route is that there is like a community, and you become essentially a member of that community in order to engage with the sacraments, and that there are other offerings on top of that we are essentially a church. But I really loved your point on religion, because as someone who grew up with a grandfather who was a bishop of the Methodist Church, had written all the books on Methodism, I was somewhat traumatized by some aspects of religion and things I had learned. And so founding a church really triggered some of my belief systems. But I appreciate what Mohandas Gandhi said about it, which is basically that religion is just a set of beliefs of something beyond ourselves, and a shared set of beliefs of something beyond ourselves. And he made it that simple and that sort of vague. But the more that we open ourselves to what the possibility of religion could be, I think is going to allow us to understand that these vessels are just opportunities for us to be in community with each other. And there are some things that we might keep from the religions that we know of this time, like some rituals and things that might feel good. And then there will be many others that we throw away, that we don't keep, and that are not part of our structure because they have been more divisive than anything else. And what we believe in House of Embodied Metamorphosis is decentralized spirituality. So a little more on the Buddhist concept, right? Where you can be Buddhist and you could be Catholic too if you wanted to. You can be all the things. There's no holding you back from believing in different belief systems. So that's where we're at right now on those things. We also have, I will say, for those who are interested in whether they're interested in beginning their own entheogenic church, we hired a legal team who had awareness around this and who knew what they were doing, and was able to help us draft our statement of beliefs and our bylaws and all of that, and create our council of like advisors and things. But we also do have like an LLC where a lot of our funding is through. And so the 508c1a is primarily there for the protection of our members and for the process of serving this medicine safely. But in terms of a lot of other things, we operate like a business, much like many other churches. I mean, even like the Presbyterian Church has its own LLC or its own business, as well as being a faith-based organization.
Yeah. So obviously it's a lot more than just someone's coming out and saying, well, this is my religious belief, and so this is what we're doing. But it's a little strange, but it's also, it is one of the positive aspects of the society that we live in, that you can do this. There are a lot of hoops that you have to jump through. And, even for some, this is where we do get into certain cultural assumptions, like the idea that a religion should have a clear statement of belief or faith. Mm-hmm. That's a cultural bias.
Totally.
it doesn't apply universally around the world, across cultures and across time, but it's the society that we live in. That's how our society thinks of religion. So it's something that we've got to do. And then some kind of governing body, again, that's not necessarily universally applicable around the world to all cultures and societies, but that's how it works. So as long as you're comfortable working within the particular framework that they give you, and if you are willing to take the legal steps to kind of jump through these hoops, this is the potential, that there is this possibility that you can establish a church. Now, when it comes to the church itself, then are you working from a specific liturgy? And, do you have specific ritual structures that you're using, say, prayers or meditations or, again, ritual actions that take place that kind of establish this is our method, this is what we do? And that I think with a lot of these legal requirements is the idea that everybody who's participating, that they know what the statement of belief is, they know what the liturgy is, they know, that everybody, is indoctrinated. To use the term very loosely, that they're indoctrinated. They know what the doctrine is. I mean, that's how the Santo Daime Church succeeded. That they were able to say, look, we have a very clear doctrine. We have a very clear line between members and who are not members. We have a very specific liturgy and ritual structure that we follow. And this is where Soul Quest failed, is that when the DEA agents are walking around asking people at Soul Quest, well, what's the ritual structure? What is your statement of faith? What do you guys believe? And everybody told them something different. They said, oh, well, this isn't a religion. So how does that work for the House of Embodied Metamorphosis?
Thank you. Yeah. Yes. And this is where I used to run culture and communications at Facebook and did a lot of work around values and basically the whole campaign of like, how do we get everyone in this organization to believe in the same thing on some level? So it's been really interesting to go from a company like that and doing that kind of work into founding this community space, which is around healing and growth and expansion, obviously transformation, because it is metamorphosis. And so the way we view that is our values, which people know because we speak them and talk about them regularly. We have principles, we have an ethos, and we also have a code of ethics that we all operate by. And as we grow and get bigger, we will very likely add to these things. And we have a 50 pages of statement of beliefs, which we don't expect the members to memorize by any means. But the shared belief is also in the concept of decentralized spirituality, that every single being has their own direct channel to their own spiritual source, whatever and whoever that may be. And that is a shared belief system among all of us. And ironically, it's like our shared belief is that we all have different beliefs. Yeah. But we feel that is incredibly important for the next layer of consciousness, because it allows us to hold both sides and the non-dual approach and the non-polarizing and divisive approach that we've seen in a lot of other religions and belief systems.
Yeah, it actually inspired me just to open up this file that I have here on my desktop. So this is something that I wrote up back in 2008 after my first 5-MeO DMT experience. And this is also when I was starting to associate with the Santo Daime Church here in Ashland. And they were just starting their court case. And kind of along the lines of what you're saying, that I ended up writing this document that I called the Universal Declaration of the Human Right to Direct Spiritual Experience. Coming out of a background of religious studies, that I understand religion, I understand spirituality, but through this experience of 5-MeO DMT, I had a quote unquote religious experience. And my feelings were, well, this wasn't connected to an institution. It's not connected to a set of beliefs. It's not connected to any kind of ritual structure. It's my direct connection to my experience. So I'll just share just a few snippets of this with you, because I think it's along the lines of what you're talking about with the decentralized spirituality. Mm-hmm. So the Universal Declaration of the Human Right to Direct Spiritual Experience. Human beings are innately spiritual. The human quest for spiritual meaning and experience is fundamental to the human experience. Personal spiritual experience is furthermore understood to be one of the most intimate aspects of a person's identity, sense of self, and worldview. While the human quest for spiritual meaning and experience can be institutionalized through the formation and continuation of religious traditions, the drive for spiritual meaning and experience is not limited to religious activity or membership per se. Religious practice and membership is not identical to spiritual experience. Religion, as a social institution, provides opportunity for like-minded people to gather together in groups to collectively express their beliefs in the context of shared practices. Religion provides structures of rituals, ceremony, religious teachings, and a community of similarly oriented individuals. Okay, blah, blah, blah. While religious membership and activity is universally recognized as a fundamental human right and is protected by law, individual pursuit of spiritual experiences has not been afforded the same legal protections. This act seeks to correct this omission from the list of universal human rights. Because the locus of direct spiritual experience is the individual, protections for individual spiritual experience must be afforded directly to individuals rather than to the institutions in which they practice. As a result, protection for direct spiritual experience is not limited to individuals who are members of religious traditions, but extend equally to all individuals, regardless of religious affiliation or lack thereof. So it goes on from there, but it sounds like that's what you're promoting within the structure of the House of Embodied Metamorphosis.
Damn, Martin, that was great. I love that. And yes, the essence of that is so on point to what we are doing. And I really appreciate the way that you bring that into even like a governmental kind of declaration, right? That is so needed in this world. And I hope you will also share a copy of that with me so that I can read it fully later.
Sure, wow. I'd be happy to. I actually had a friend take it to the United Nations at some point, and he was passing out copies at the UN. I don't know if anything ever became of it, but yeah, that's where I was inspired. Like, I was like, because I felt like I don't want to create a church, I don't want to create an institution, but I think everybody should have the right to have the experience that I just had.
Yep. I couldn't agree more. It's so fascinating because my grandfather's last book that he wrote, he dedicated to me, and it was called. And mind you, this was a man, he died at 100, almost 101. And he had written about 18 books. And he started by writing major United Methodist beliefs. So he wrote on all of the doctrine of the Methodist Church, like very traditional. His last book was called Person to Person, capital P. And it was all about the direct relationship between the individual and God, and how we can get there through prayer, and what you and I might call meditation. And that, to me, it was like quite rebellious of him to speak about that in a church or in any kind of like religious institutional space. So I feel that this message is incredibly important as we move into the next consciousness that we're all stepping into. And I feel very called to encourage people to really embody exactly what you are sharing, which is that declaration and that ownership and that sovereignty of my own spiritual connection. And our container can be a vessel for that. But what you experience is your experience. It's not mine. It's not even ours to some extent. It's yours. And when you want to share it, you can. But I really appreciate that you have taken the time to think about this as well.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that you're putting it into action. So, at the
Yeah.
practical level, can members of the Asheville community can they go to the House of Embodied Metamorphosis? How does one participate?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. Um, right now, our house lives online and we offer retreats in different places. So, what you asked before, if basically the protection extends to different
Yeah.
places, that's correct. And so, what we do is we operate in various retreat centers around the country, and our container, then that place becomes the House of Metamorphosis for that period of time. We do have plans in our future to have a home base, a House of Metamorphosis that will be more permanent. But we also, like next year, we have one, two, three, four, at least 5 or 6 retreats that we'll be hosting around the country, and then also down in Costa Rica at a really beautiful retreat center called Holos. And we will be, but we offer these retreats and we also offer like coaching programs along the way. So we have coaching programs and online programs that people can engage with, and you can go to metamorphosis.ventures, and that is our website where you can find out more about all of our upcoming events, all that we're doing. And I always say, if you want to connect directly with me, you can also follow me on Instagram, because I am still on Instagram, even even after seeing the sausage making at Facebook and Instagram. And you can follow me at Susannah Roses. And perhaps you can share that with your audience. But basically, we are developing a modern way of connecting, and so few churches from the past, or the religions of the past, have really been able to like get people online. This feels like the next frontier of where people are gathering. So we are asking people to gather there first, and then we will see you at our retreats too.
Cool. So do you feel that this is a shareable model in the sense that, let's say somebody in Alaska said, hey, I want to become a member of the House
Mhm.
of Embodied Metamorphosis, and I like what you've done. I'd like to adopt that here, or somebody in Hawaii. Is that something that you feel, or even legally, is that something that can be done? Can people join in that way?
Yeah. We are working on right now a mentorship program where we are training new facilitators. And ideally, we will not take the hierarchical approach where there's like a mothership and then
Yeah.
all the other ones follow suit, but more like, to be honest, I do like how Facebook has tried to at least become more local in the places where they go. And I've taken a lot of concepts from the localization of things, because I'm a big believer in like tribal sort of cultural small community service to each other, because when we try to make anything really big or beyond a certain scale, it gets impersonal. And so we do have a vision for having more chapters of House of Metamorphosis, but each one with its own flavor and its own local connection, where the servers and the facilitators are also members of that community, that kind of thing. And that keeps it from being we don't want a pyramid scheme, right?
Yeah.
We don't want that top down hierarchical approach. And we're all 3 of our founders were all women. And so we just really want this to be as co-creative as possible, which also requires us to do our own work of like shedding the hierarchical system nature and the patriarchal narratives that we've been brought up in. So as we grow and are involved, if you or others in the community have wisdom, I mean, we even explore things like a DAO, right? Which is like a crypto kind of concept where every member has like a say in the voting process. And we want to figure out how to support our members really running the organization versus it being hierarchical from more traditional lineages.
Oh, well, it's very exciting to be able to connect with you kind of right at this time. as you've moved from the pending status to actually having that approved. And it just feels like this is the beginning. And I just want to applaud you for putting in the work, for dotting all the I's and crossing the T's. And I'm sure it's a pain, but since you kind of come out of that lineage with your family, you know what it's about. So somebody's got to do it. And I just want to applaud you for having done it and making this happen. And I'm excited to see how it grows from here. And I just want to thank you for all of your time today and sharing of your personal story and your background and some of the bumps and the insights along the way. That it's always juicy to, just talk at a human to human level and, make those connections. And it's been great having you on the show, Susannah. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you, Martin. And thank you for holding that level of consciousness that just allows people to be and to exist and to have their own decentralized and sovereign experience. You hold that space really beautifully. So I appreciate you having me on, and I look forward to staying in touch.
All right. Awesome.